We have no choice but to fight back, or all will be lost. The final stand against an alien threat. Felix Donovan stood at the window of the spacecraft, staring out at the endless red landscape of Mars 2. The barren planet stretched before him, its dry, cracked surface scattered with jagged rocks and strange formations. This wasn't just any mission. It was humanity's chance to make contact with the Rhikarians, a race known for their powerful control over energy and advanced technology. Felix was about to be the first human to step foot on their world. "Captain, we're approaching the landing zone." Lieutenant Sarah Patel's voice broke through the silence. Felix turned, nodding as he gathered his gear. "Understood, Lieutenant. Everyone stay sharp. This isn't a routine drop," Felix replied, his voice steady but his mind racing. He knew the importance of this moment, not just for him, but for all of humanity. Mars 2 was the key to future relations with the Rhikarians, a species far beyond Earth's current technological understanding. The spacecraft's engines hummed as they descended toward the planet's surface. As the ship touched down, a low thud resonated throughout the hull. Felix and his team quickly disembarked, their boots crunching against the dry, reddish soil. The air felt thin, almost alien, and the silence of Mars 2 was deafening. Looking around, Felix couldn't help but feel the weight of the moment. This was the first step into the unknown. Mars 2 was a desolate world, a place where nothing lived naturally. Yet the Rhikarians had thrived here, building structures that pulsed with energy, their technology far more advanced than anything Earth had encountered. "Keep your eyes open," Felix said to his team, leading them toward the distant city visible in the horizon. "We're not just here to explore, we're here to form a future. Let's make sure we get it right." As they walked, Felix's mind raced with questions. The Rhikarians were known to be secretive and elusive. What did they truly want from humanity? Why had they chosen Mars 2 as the site for contact? And what was the real motive behind their willingness to interact with Earth at all? Finally, a figure emerged from the shimmering city, a tall, silver-skinned Rhikarian, her eyes shifting like liquid light. "I am Neria," she spoke directly into Felix's mind, her voice smooth and calm. "Welcome to Mars 2. Felix straightened. Her presence was unlike anything he had ever felt. It wasn't just her appearance. It was the overwhelming sense of energy she emanated. The Rhikarians controlled energy, not as we understand it, but as a part of their very being. "We come in peace," Felix said, his voice firm, though he couldn't shake the uneasy feeling in his stomach. "We're here to begin negotiations." Neria tilted her head, her expression unreadable. "Peace is a fragile concept, human. Understand that we do not seek alliance in the traditional sense. Our needs differ from yours." Felix felt a tension in the air, an unspoken warning. This wasn't going to be easy, but it was necessary. "Then let's begin by understanding each other," he said. The future of humanity's relationship with the Rhikarians hinged on this moment. Felix knew it wouldn't be simple, but it was the only chance they had. The first days on Mars 2 were marked by uncertainty and awe. Felix Donovan and his team spent their time acclimating to the environment, setting up their base near the Rhikarian city. But amidst the logistical work, Felix knew that the true challenge was yet to come, meeting Neria, the Rhikarian warrior tasked with overseeing the human delegation. Neria was not just any Rhikarian. She stood out even among her kind. With silver skin that shimmered under Mars 2's distant sun, her eyes constantly shifted through various colors, pools of light that were mesmerizing and unreadable. Her presence was commanding, and Felix couldn't help but be intrigued. She wasn't just a messenger. She was a bridge between two worlds, a warrior and a diplomat rolled into one. As Felix approached her for the first time, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched not just by her eyes, but by the energy that seemed to radiate from her very being. Her gaze met his, and there was an intensity in her look that made him feel as though she could peer straight into his soul. It was disarming, and for a moment, Felix had to resist the urge to look away. "Felix Donovan," Neria said, her voice calm but deep, resonating inside Felix's head like a gentle hum. "You are far from your home. I sense uncertainty within you, as though you are unsure of what you have come to find here." Felix squared his shoulders, forcing himself to maintain eye contact. but there was a nervous flutter in his chest. We come in peace, to establish a relationship, to understand each other. Her eyes flickered with an unreadable emotion, and Felix couldn't help but wonder if she was testing him. We Rhikarians do not share your concepts of peace and war, human. We do not seek alliance for the reasons you might think. We seek understanding. Cooperation, yes, but under our terms. Her words struck Felix like a blow to the chest. Was this truly the peaceful overture he had hoped for, or was there something more lurking beneath the surface? Felix had to tread carefully. "And what terms are those, Hornman?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady, though doubt was starting to creep into his mind. "We want to build a world, a shared existence, but one in which we are not beholden to your ways," Neria continued. "Your kind seeks resources, but we offer knowledge in return for trust. Only through trust can we move forward." Felix listened carefully, his mind racing. Neria was offering cooperation, but there was an unmistakable undercurrent of dominance in her words. Trust was important, yes, but what if that trust was a tool, something to be used rather than freely given? Felix's instinct screamed at him that something wasn't right, but he kept his suspicions hidden. "I understand," Felix replied, though his thoughts were anything but certain. "And how do we build this trust?" Neria's lips curved into something resembling a smile. "That, human, is something you must prove, and prove it in ways you cannot yet comprehend." Felix was about to respond when the ground suddenly trembled beneath them. A loud rumble echoed through the city, followed by the unmistakable sound of energy blasts cutting through the air. Felix's first instinct was to reach for his weapon, but before he could, Neria raised her hand, her body enveloped in a shimmering light. "Stay calm, human," she said, her voice now stern, as though her earlier demeanor had been a mere prelude. "The Rhikarian city is under attack." Felix's heart pounded in his chest as his eyes scanned the surroundings. What the hell was happening? "Attack? By who?" Felix demanded, his voice betraying his growing sense of unease. Neria's expression turned grim. "We are being assaulted by the Vaykar, the very creatures you seek to understand. They are not what you think." Felix's mind raced. He had read about the Vaykar, rumors of a predatory species that had been wiped out in a mysterious conflict with the Rhikarians. But to hear that they were the attackers now, and that Neria seemed so familiar with them, shattered his expectations. "How do we stop them?" Felix asked urgently. Neria's gaze softened, and for the first time, Felix saw a flicker of vulnerability in her eyes. "We fight together. Only through cooperation can we defeat them. But understand this, human. Nothing is as it seems." The sudden eruption of violence on Mars Secund shattered the fragile calm. Felix had no warning. One moment, the planet's silent landscape was their battlefield of diplomacy, and the next, chaos reigned. The ground trembled beneath them as blinding flashes of light filled the sky, followed by the deep hum of alien energy weapons. The Vaykar had returned. "They've breached the outer perimeter." Neria's voice rang in Felix's head, her tone sharp and urgent. He didn't need further explanation. The Vaykar, predatory creatures believed to be extinct, were now attacking, and Mars 2 was ground zero for a violent resurgence. Felix had been briefed on the Vaykar, but nothing could have prepared him for the terror they unleashed. These creatures were unlike anything he had ever seen, tall, lithe, with skin that seemed to absorb light, and eyes that glowed a fierce red. They moved with deadly precision, their strength enhanced by a bio-organic armor that made them nearly invulnerable to standard weaponry. Their energy-based weapons wreaked havoc, searing through the Rhikarian shields and scattering Felix's team into disarray. "We need to hold the perimeter," Felix shouted, rallying his team. But the Rhikarians, although powerful, were not invincible. Felix could see them struggling. No amount of energy manipulation could stop the Vaykar's raw, primal fury. What made the situation even more dire was that Felix and his team had no backup. Rhikarians might control energy, but their focus on peace and diplomacy left them unprepared for a brutal, full-scale assault. Felix's training, however, kicked in. "Team, we fall back to the nearest structure. Secure it and regroup. We need to buy time." The situation quickly escalated. Felix's team fought valiantly, using every piece of equipment and tactic at their disposal. But without proper intel on the Vaykar's tactics, it felt like fighting shadows. Meanwhile, Neria, glowing with energy, moved swiftly through the chaos, her weapon cutting through Vaykar's soldiers with frightening precision. Then in the heat of the battle, Felix saw her. Neria was struck. A blast from a Vaykar's energy weapon sent her sprawling to the ground, her glowing armor flickering weakly. For a brief moment, Felix hesitated. Despite his suspicions about her true intentions, the instinct to protect kicked in. "Damn it, Neria!" Felix shouted, rushing to her side. He didn't care about the potential deception anymore. She was an ally, someone who could help them survive. Kneeling beside her, Felix quickly administered first aid using the medical tools he carried, his hands working as fast as they could to stabilize her. Neria's eyes fluttered open, her gaze meeting his. There was a brief flicker of gratitude, but it was fleeting. "You saved me," she murmured, her voice weak. Felix nodded, his gaze hardening. "We need you in this fight, Neria, now more than ever." Neria pushed herself up, her energy armor slowly recharging. "I'm not one to be saved," she replied, her tone regaining its strength, "but you will need my help." As they fought side by side, Felix began to see Neria in a new light. Her skills were unmatched, and her knowledge of Rhikarian technology proved to be a game-changer. She manipulated energy fields with an ease that Felix could never hope to match. Together, they formed a powerful force. Felix coordinated his team, while Neria dismantled the Vaykar's energy weapons with surgical precision. It was the first time Felix truly understood the full depth of her abilities. As the battle raged on, Felix's suspicions about the Rhikarians began to fade. Neria wasn't just a warrior, she was someone capable of far more than Felix had initially imagined. The battle to survive was far from over, but for the first time, Felix felt a sense of hope. However, as the Vaykar forces began to retreat, a chilling realization settled in. Felix now knew that the Vaykar's attack was no coincidence. There was a larger plan at play, one far more dangerous than they had ever anticipated. And in the heat of battle, Felix's mistrust of Neria only deepened. Was she truly on their side, or had he just made an ally out of his greatest threat? The battle against the Vaykar had ended, but the aftermath left Felix with more questions than answers. The tension that lingered in the air was thick, and the uneasy silence between him and Neria spoke volumes. Despite their victory, Felix couldn't shake the growing suspicion that the Rhikarians had been hiding something far darker than he could have imagined. Felix's doubts began to surface as he surveyed the battlefield. The Rhikarians had fought valiantly, but something about their actions during the fight felt rehearsed, almost too calculated. Their technology was impressive, yet their strategy seemed to have been planned only to defend, nothing to neutralize the threat permanently. Why hadn't they already taken full control of the situation before it escalated? Neria's calm demeanor in the face of such chaos also raised alarm. She had been wounded, yet after Felix saved her, she seemed more concerned with the ongoing battle than her own injuries. Felix couldn't ignore the possibility that Neria had known more about the Vaykar threat than she had let on. Was this attack a well-timed diversion, or was it orchestrated for another purpose? Determined to uncover the truth, Felix began investigating on his own. Late into the night, he accessed the Rhikarian databases under the guise of negotiating future terms. What he uncovered sent a shock through him. The Rhikarians had been conducting dangerous experiments aimed at transforming the Vaykar into a bioengineered weapon. The implications were staggering. The Vaykar, a species that had once been an enemy of the Rhikarians, were now being used as pawns in a grand scheme, turned into living weapons for potential galactic conquest. Felix realized that the Vaykar's attack wasn't an unprovoked assault. It was likely part of a larger test or demonstration of Rhikarian power. The discovery shook Felix to his core. If the Rhikarians succeeded in turning the Vaykar into a biological weapon, it would not only mean disaster for Mars too, but for all life in the galaxy. The potential for the spread of this new weapon could be catastrophic, destabilizing the balance of power across the stars. Felix knew he had to act quickly to expose the truth, but with the Rhikarians being as powerful as they were, Could he reveal their plans without sparking an even larger conflict? The discovery would change everything. Trust in the Rhikarians had shattered, and Felix now had to figure out how to protect humanity and the galaxy from their dark ambitions. The fragile diplomatic mission had been exposed for what it truly was, a front for something much more dangerous. Felix's world shattered the moment he discovered the truth about Nyria. What he had believed to be an alliance based on mutual respect and necessity was, in fact, a carefully crafted lie. Nyria, the warrior he had come to trust, was not an ally. She was a Rhikarian spy, planted within his team to monitor, control, and manipulate him. The revelation came in a quiet moment, as Felix reviewed the information he had uncovered about the Vaykar experiments. It was a piece of data buried deep within Rhikarian files, a recorded message from Nyria herself, one that had been hidden under layers of encryption. Her words were chilling. Felix Donovan is becoming a threat. I must ensure the mission succeeds. Rhikarians cannot afford to lose this opportunity. Felix felt a cold wave of realization crash over him. He replayed every conversation with Nyria in his mind, each word, each glance, and the growing sense of betrayal. How had he not seen the signs? Perhaps it was her unflinching dedication, her calculated kindness that had clouded his judgment. She had always been one step ahead, guiding him, teaching him the way of the Rhikarians, but all the while she had been working against him. The moment Felix confronted Nyria, her expression flickered. There was no surprise, only a quiet resignation. "You found out, haven't you?" she asked, her voice low. "Yes, I was sent to monitor you, but that was never all there was." Felix's heart twisted in anger and confusion. "Why, Nyria? Why deceive me like this?" Her gaze softened for a moment, and Felix saw a brief glimpse of the woman he had once trusted. "I had my orders," she said, her voice faltering. "But after spending time with you, after seeing how you fight, how you care, I couldn't continue deceiving myself." Nyria's words hit Felix hard. She had become conflicted. A part of her had begun to feel something real for him, and in that moment, she made a decision. "I'm not the same person I was when I arrived. I won't help the Rhikarians anymore. They've gone too far." Felix's disbelief began to turn into a cold resolve. If Nyria was truly on his side, then she was his most powerful asset. "We can stop them together," Felix said, though the trust he once had for her had been irrevocably broken. "But you have to prove it. Prove that you can really stand with us." Nyria nodded, her energy armor pulsing with renewed strength. "I will help you destroy the weapon. I will give you everything I know, but you must trust me." Felix hesitated, his mind racing. The Rhikarians had always been the dominant force, and with Nyria's help, they had a chance. But Felix knew the stakes were higher now than ever before. Would Nyria's change of heart be enough to alter the course of the coming war? Together, Felix and Nyria began formulating a plan to expose the Rhikarian scheme and end the threat once and for all. With her inside knowledge and Felix's tactical brilliance, they began plotting how to infiltrate the Rhikarian stronghold and destroy the weapon they had created. But Felix knew one thing for certain. The battle ahead would not just be against the Rhikarians. It would be against the ghosts of trust and betrayal, and the consequences of those choices would shape the fate of the galaxy. The battle for Mars 2 had begun in earnest. Felix and his team found themselves at the center of an all-out war. The Rhikarians had activated their plan for invasion, using the biological weapons they had developed from the Vaykar, and deploying their most elite warriors to ensure victory. Mars 2, already a hostile and unforgiving environment, had become a battlefield that would decide the fate of the galaxy. Felix had no choice but to fight. His years of experience in combat, his sharp strategic mind, and his ability to keep his team focused under pressure were now more vital than ever. As the Rhikarian forces advanced, Felix's team adjusted their tactics to meet the overwhelming firepower they faced. "We need to use the terrain to our advantage," Felix ordered, his eyes scanning the Martian landscape. "Set up defensive positions at the canyon's edge. We'll force them to come to us, and we'll use hit-and-run tactics." Nyria, now fully aligned with Felix's team, stood at his side. Her knowledge of Rhikarian warfare was invaluable. "We know their weaknesses. The elite warriors are strong, but they rely too much on their energy-based tech. she explained, a hint of fire in her eyes. "We can neutralize them by cutting off their energy sources." Together, Felix and Neria spearheaded a plan to disable the Rhikarian energy grids, hoping that severing their power would level the playing field. Felix knew that without power, the Rhikarians would lose their most potent weapon, their energy shields. It was a risky move, but it was their best shot at survival. As the battle unfolded, Felix's team fought fiercely. The Rhikarians, although technologically superior, underestimated the resilience of Felix's team and the human spirit. But there were sacrifices. The Vaykar, now twisted and enhanced by the Rhikarians into monstrous beings, wreaked havoc on the battlefield. Felix's close friend, Lieutenant Patel, was caught in the crossfire, falling to an energy blast. The sight of his team members falling one by one weighed heavily on Felix, but he knew he couldn't let their deaths be in vain. "Stay focused, we can still win this," Felix shouted to his team, though his heart was heavy. He knew that, as the battle raged on, the risk of betrayal from within the Rhikarian ranks remained. Some Rhikarians, loyal to their empire, might still turn against him. As the biological weapons began to take effect, Felix saw the devastating impact on the environment. The air began to thicken with toxic spores, and the once desolate landscape of Mars 2 began to twist into something unrecognizable. The Vaykar, no longer mere predators, were unleashed as instruments of destruction. Felix's team had to act quickly to counter the spread of the biological agents before the entire planet became a wasteland. But just when it seemed like all hope was lost, Neria and several other Rhikarians who had joined her cause turned the tide. They had infiltrated the Rhikarian stronghold, sabotaging the central biological weapon. Neria's betrayal of her own people became the pivotal moment in the fight. "We don't just fight for Mars 2, Neria said, her voice strong as she stood beside Felix. "We fight for everything that's worth saving in this galaxy." With the biological weapon disabled and their energy systems compromised, the Rhikarian forces began to retreat. The elite warriors, once unstoppable, faltered without the support of their deadly tech. Felix's team, battered but determined, pressed forward. The war was not yet won, but the balance had shifted. Mars 2's harsh environment, once a disadvantage, now worked in their favor. The difficult terrain provided natural barriers that forced the Rhikarians to advance slowly, giving Felix's team the edge they needed. As resources dwindled and the battle reached its peak, Felix made a final, desperate push. "We can't stop now. We push them back to their ship. We end this here." It was a battle against the odds, but with the unexpected support of Neria and her allies, the tide had turned. The Rhikarians' invasion had been thwarted, and the weapons they had so carefully developed were destroyed. The cost was high, but Felix's determination and the strength of his team had saved Mars 2, and perhaps the entire galaxy, from a devastating war. Felix crouched behind the shattered remains of a Rhikarian energy shield, his breath ragged, eyes scanning the battlefield. The fight was fierce and the once clear enemy lines had blurred. The Vaykar, those horrific beasts he had fought with such conviction, were no longer just enemies. They were victims. Felix's pulse quickened as he pieced together the truth. He had spent days reviewing intelligence, comparing reports and intercepted messages. The patterns were unmistakable, but the real breakthrough came when he encountered one of the Vaykar warriors who had been captured alive. The creature's eyes were different. There was something behind the rage, a glimmer of recognition. He spoke, his voice hoarse, barely audible through his heavy breathing. "We were once like them." The words hit Felix like a thunderbolt. It was the first sign, an admission, however faint, that the Vaykar were more than mere monsters. Felix's thoughts raced. "What do you mean?" he asked, stepping closer, his tone softer than before. The Vaykar's eyes flickered with pain, like the last remnants of a once conscious mind. "We were once the people of the Rhikarians, before they changed us. We were peaceful," it muttered, before slumping, too weak to speak further. Felix staggered back, his mind reeling. The signs had always been there. The hesitation in the Vaykar's combat tactics, the unnatural cruelty that they fought with. It wasn't their nature. They had been coerced, twisted into something unrecognizable. His first instinct had been to view them as enemies, the aggressors in a war. But now with this revelation, Felix understood that the Rhikarians had transformed them into tools of war, using genetic manipulation and cruel experiments to break their spirits and force them into servitude. Felix clenched his fists. The battle had changed in an instant. "We can't keep fighting them," he muttered under his breath. "They're not the enemy. They're just victims like us." He turned to Neria, who had been helping coordinate their assault. Her armor was scratched and scorched, her eyes narrowed with focus. She had been with him through everything, but this moment was different. The truth weighed heavily on her as well. Felix's voice shook as he addressed her. "Neria, I can't kill them. Not after this." Neria stepped forward, her silver eyes softening with understanding. "I know, but what do we do now, Felix? The Rhikarians won't stop. They're still using the Vaykar as weapons. The invasion isn't over." Felix's mind raced. If he tried to stop the Rhikarians, he risked losing everything. The mission, his team, and the future he had fought so hard to secure for humanity. But how could he go on fighting the Vaykar? They were victims, warped by experiments, made to suffer. "What if we could free them? Stop the Rhikarians and let the Vaykar live?" Felix said, his voice growing more resolute. "I can't continue this war unless we do something about them." Neria nodded, determination in her eyes. "It won't be easy, but we have to try." With their decision made, Felix and Neria led their team to the heart of the Rhikarian stronghold. They infiltrated the central facility where the Vaykar were being held and genetically altered. The lab was heavily guarded, but their combined knowledge of Rhikarian technology and tactics made them a formidable force. They managed to breach the outer defenses and reach the heart of the operation, where the transformation process was being conducted. But just as they were about to disable the lab's core reactor, disaster struck. The Rhikarian commander, a hulking warrior, blocked their path. "You would save these abominations," he roared, his voice dripping with disdain. Felix's heart raced. He stood facing the inevitable, a choice between saving the Vaykar or continuing to fight the Rhikarians. The Rhikarian forces closed in, and there was no time left. Neria turned to Felix, her face hardened with resolve. "Do it, Felix. We have to destroy this place. It's the only way." Felix nodded, knowing that making this choice meant everything. They set the charges, preparing for the final explosion. But just as they were about to retreat, the reactor began to overload. A shockwave of energy flooded the room, knocking both Felix and Neria off their feet. Pain surged through Felix's body, and for a moment, everything went black. When he regained consciousness, he found Neria beside him, equally battered, her breath shallow. "Felix, we have to finish this," she whispered, her voice pained but steady. Felix struggled to stand, his body screaming in protest. He could feel the weight of the world on his shoulders, but the truth was undeniable. He had to carry on, for the Vaykar, for his team. "We finish this together," he muttered, looking down at Neria, who nodded with quiet strength. Despite their injuries, Felix and Neria fought their way out of the lab, knowing that the only way to stop the Rhikarians was to destroy the source of their power, by taking it all down with them. The final battle raged as the reactor exploded behind them, sending a shock wave through Mars 2. The Rhikarian forces faltered without their advanced technology, their ranks collapsing in the wake of the destruction. As Felix stumbled out of the wreckage, he knew they had saved Mars 2 and the Vaykar, but at a cost. The price of their victory was immense. He looked at Neria, his companion and now his closest ally, knowing that their sacrifices had forever changed the course of the war. "Together," Felix whispered, feeling the weight of the final sacrifice on his shoulders. "We did it, but it's not over. Not yet." The echoes of their battle would remain forever etched in history, a reminder of the price of freedom, the cost of trust, and the ultimate sacrifice for the future of all life in the galaxy. The sun dipped low on Mars 6, casting long shadows over the ravaged landscape. Felix stood alone on a ridge, gazing out over the battlefield, his helmet clutched in his hands. The silence felt oppressive, broken only by the distant sound of his team moving among the wreckage, salvaging what they could. The ground was littered with the remnants of the battle, charred metal, broken weapons, and bodies of both human and Rhikarian soldiers. It was a victory, but it tasted like ash in his mouth. Felix, we're ready to move out. Neria's voice cut through his thoughts. She had approached quietly, her silver armor stained with dust and blood. Despite the visible wear of battle, there was a quiet strength in her posture as she stood beside him. Felix nodded, his gaze never leaving the horizon. "What's left of the Rhikarian forces?" he asked, his voice a mixture of exhaustion and determination. "They're regrouping," Neria replied, scanning the horizon. "Most of the elite warriors are either dead or scattered, but the survivors are confused. They don't know what to do with themselves now." Felix turned to face her. "What do you think? Can they rebuild?" Neria's eyes were distant, her mind clearly on the broken warriors she had once called comrades. "Some of them might want to, but others, those who believed in the Rhikarian Empire, they're lost. They need guidance, a reason to fight for something else now." Felix could see the conflict in her eyes. She was one of them, but she was also someone who had rejected everything the Empire had stood for. He knew she wasn't just asking himself, she was questioning her own place in the galaxy now. "We'll help them," Felix said firmly. "We'll give them a chance to rebuild." He hesitated, looking over at the still bodies of their fallen comrades. "But we need to do it right. We can't just wipe the slate clean and pretend it didn't happen." Neria nodded, understanding the weight of his words. "What about the Vaykar?" Felix had been wrestling with that question ever since the battle. The Vaykar, once thought to be the enemy, were victims, transformed by the very people Felix had been fighting alongside. "They've been used," Felix said quietly, "but they don't have to remain weapons. If we can offer them a chance to live without being controlled, we should." "We've already seen what they're capable of," Neri observed, her gaze turning toward a group of Vaykar who were carefully working to remove debris from a ruined building. "It'll take time, but maybe they can be more than soldiers. They've lived in chains for so long." Felix's expression hardened with resolve. "We'll show them that there's another way. They don't deserve to be abandoned now." As Felix and Neria moved through the camp, directing their remaining forces and coordinating with the Vaykar workers, Felix couldn't shake the feeling that peace was still an elusive goal. The Rhikarians who had survived the battle were starting to form small groups. Some had begun rebuilding their equipment and helping the wounded, while others stood off to the side, eyes haunted, unsure of where their loyalties should lie. Felix approached one of the Rhikarian soldiers, a tall woman whose armor was scorched but still intact. She stood near the remnants of the battlefield, her arms crossed, staring out over the wreckage. Felix could see the confusion and fear in her posture. "You don't have to fight anymore," Felix said, his voice calm but firm. The Rhikarian soldier glanced at him, her eyes flicking over his uniform, scanning him for signs of weakness or deceit. "What now?" she asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Our empire's gone. Our purpose has been taken from us." Felix stepped closer, trying to offer her the same resolve that had kept him moving forward. "You have a choice. You can rebuild. You can fight for something better, something that doesn't involve destruction. It won't be easy, but it's the only way forward." The soldier stood still for a moment, considering his words. "And if we don't?" she asked, voice cracking. "Then you're lost," Felix said, "and I can't help you." She met his gaze then, a moment of quiet understanding passing between them. She nodded slightly and turned away, disappearing into the crowd of survivors. Felix felt the weight of the moment settle on his shoulders. He had just given someone the chance to change, to choose peace. But it wasn't enough to simply offer the opportunity. The real work had only just begun. Later that evening, Felix and Neria sat near the remnants of a fire. The day's work was winding down, and the camp had started to take on a sense of uneasy calm. Felix's thoughts kept drifting back to the Vaykar. He watched them working together with the humans and the Rhikarians, each of them carrying out tasks to help rebuild the broken city. "It's going to take years," Felix said, his voice low. "Maybe decades to heal the wounds here, but it's worth trying." Neria turned to him, her face illuminated by the flickering firelight. "And what about you, Felix? What do you want now?" Felix looked into the fire, his eyes distant. "I want to honor the sacrifices of those we lost. I want to build something real from this war. Something that means something. Neria placed a hand on his shoulder. And you will, she said. But you'll need to trust the people around you. Trust that they can change. Felix nodded slowly. Trust. It had been hard for him to build, even harder to give. But if they were to truly build a future, if he was to honor the memory of those they had lost, he knew that was the only way forward. As the stars began to fill the sky, Felix looked around at the camp. The Vaykar worked alongside the Rhikarians, the once hostile species beginning the long process of rebuilding together. Perhaps this was the first step to peace, a painful, slow beginning. But it was a beginning nonetheless. Felix closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of the past few days pressing down on him. He had survived the war, but now more than ever, he had to survive the peace. Felix stood in the war room, his fingers tapping nervously on the edge of the table. The atmosphere was tense as he looked over the progress of the rebuilding efforts on Mars 2. The battle was over, the Rhikarians were in disarray, and the Vaykar had begun to integrate with the human and Rhikarian survivors. It felt like peace was on the horizon finally, a chance for the galaxy to heal. But something gnawed at him, a feeling he couldn't shake. There was an unsettling silence, a feeling that they hadn't finished the fight yet. He looked around at the faces of his team, tired but hopeful, believing that the worst had passed. And maybe for them, it had. But for Felix, there was something off. He pushed away from the table and started pacing, his mind racing. It wasn't like him to overlook things, to miss important details. He had been too careful, too methodical, but somewhere in the weeks of fighting, rebuilding, and forging alliances, something had slipped through the cracks. There were too many questions left unanswered, too many things that didn't make sense. Neria walked into the room, her silver armor dulled from the battle, her face lined with exhaustion. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said, her voice light, but with a hint of concern. Felix stopped pacing and looked at her, his brow furrowed. "There's something we missed, something big, something that's been hiding in plain sight all along." Neria raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "We won. The Rhikarians are in disarray. The Vaykar are free. We're rebuilding. It's over." Felix shook his head. "It's not. I thought we had it all figured out. Thought the enemy was the Rhikarians. Thought they were the ones manipulating everything. But there's more to this story, Neria. There's someone else pulling the strings." Neria's expression hardened. "What are you talking about?" Felix stepped toward the console, bringing up a series of encrypted transmissions he had stumbled across just days ago. "This is the data I recovered from the Rhikarian archives. It's a timeline of events we missed, connections between factions we didn't realize were even there. But it goes beyond just Rhikarians and Vaykar. It's much bigger." His eyes scanned the documents, his hands shaking. There it was, the true puppet master, the hidden force manipulating the entire conflict. The true enemy wasn't the Rhikarians at all. It was a faction within the Rhikarian leadership, those who had remained loyal to the old empire, working in the shadows to restart the war. Neria's face paled as she read the documents over Felix's shoulder. "You're saying we didn't stop the war at all?" Felix clenched his fists, frustration boiling inside him. "No, we stopped one part of the war, the one that was easy to see. But this is far worse than anything we faced. It's a conspiracy on a galactic scale." Felix scrolled through the transmissions, piecing together the puzzle. The remnants of the Rhikarian Empire had secretly forged alliances with other factions in the galaxy, hidden under the guise of peace agreements. They had been preparing for a resurgence, a new war, one that could engulf not just Mars 2, but the entire galaxy. The Vaykar were part of this plan, but the true enemy had never been the beast they had fought. The true threat was a covert operation, using the peace to position themselves for control of the galaxy. "This is why the Rhikarians let us win," Felix said, his voice low and steady. "They weren't trying to destroy humanity. They were trying to buy time. They've been setting up a new power structure in the shadows, and now it's about to explode." Neria's voice was barely a whisper. "We're too late." Felix nodded grimly. "We might be, But we can't stop now. We have to act fast before this hidden faction can mobilize their forces. Felix paced again, his mind racing. This was bigger than any battle he had ever fought. They weren't just facing a war, they were facing a hidden enemy whose influence had spread through the galaxy like a virus. If they didn't stop it now, everything they had fought for would be destroyed. His decision came down to one question. Could they continue to fight an enemy they had only just discovered, or would they be forced to accept defeat? He had to face the fact that his previous strategies, his alliances, and his efforts were now moot if this new threat couldn't be contained. Felix had never felt more powerless, and yet in that moment, he realized he couldn't give up. Not after everything, not after all the sacrifices. We need to find out who's behind this now. If we don't, we lose everything, Felix said, his voice raw with determination. Neria stepped forward, her eyes hardening with resolve. We'll find them. We'll stop them. But Felix knew it wouldn't be that simple. The conspiracy was deeper, more insidious than he had realized. The enemy they had once thought defeated was only regrouping in secret, more dangerous than ever. As Felix looked out over Mars 2's horizon, a chill settled over him. The battle had only just begun, and this time, the enemy wasn't something they could see or touch. It was a network, an invisible force that had been growing in the shadows. Felix's mind raced with the implications. The war they had fought was nothing more than a distraction, a stepping stone for the true conquest that was about to unfold. Felix had always believed in the power of his team, the strength of the alliances they had built. But now, facing an enemy who operated in the dark, he was forced to confront the truth. Everything he had fought for, everything he had sacrificed, could still be taken away. There was no going back. Felix had to make a choice. Continue to fight the unknown, or accept that the very future he had worked so hard to protect was slipping through his fingers. His next move would decide not just the fate of Mars 2, but the future of the galaxy itself. And Felix knew there was no turning back now. Felix stood on the edge of the battlefield, staring into the uncertain horizon. The fight was far from over, and the enemy he had faced had only been a shadow of the true threat. The sacrifices made, the lives lost, now seemed like a prelude to something even darker. But as the stars began to twinkle above Mars 2, Felix felt a flicker of hope. He had always believed in the strength of his team, in the power of truth and unity. The battle for the galaxy had just begun, and this time, Felix knew they would face it together, no matter the cost.